Chapter 4. Into the Dark. One day when Leonardo was a child, he was walking near Vinci and he found a deep, dark hole in the side of a hill. He wanted to look inside, but he was afraid of the dark. It was better to walk away, but Leonardo was curious. He had to go in. Leonardo was one of the most curious men in history. He was full of questions, and he wanted to know the answers. He wanted to learn how our bodies work, how the weather changes, what the moon is made of, and many other things. Like many leaders of Renaissance humanism, Leonardo did not see a separation between science and art. He viewed the two as intertwined disciplines rather than separate ones. He believed studying science made him a better artist. He thought deeply, studied the world around him, and discovered things for himself. When Leonardo was working for Sforza in Milan, he studied the rivers, mountains, and rocks of northern Italy. He discovered how a lot of rocks are made by water over a very long time. High in the mountains, Leonardo also found fossils of animals that came from the sea. He asked, how did they get there? In Leonardo's days, people thought that the things around them, like mountains and seas, always stayed the same. But the fossils told a different story. Leonardo discovered that the world around us changes over time. He wrote about how places under the sea can become mountains. It was an amazing idea for his time, and we did not know that he was right for hundreds of years. People in Leonardo's days thought that the moon was bright because it made light. Leonardo discovered that the moon is bright because of light from the sun. Leonardo imagined that he was standing on the moon and looking back at the world. From the moon our world looks bright too, he thought. And 450 years later, we finally photographed our world from the moon, a bright, blue circle in the dark, just like Leonardo imagined. In Milan, Leonardo started to write about things like maths, painting, and engineering. His pages are full of beautiful drawings, with notes all around them. He often wrote about different things on the same piece of paper. Perhaps Leonardo did this because paper was so expensive at the time. Or perhaps he did it because he had so many ideas in his head, he could not stop thinking about different things. In 1487, Leonardo made a drawing called the Vitruvian Man. The drawing represents a nude male figure in two superimposed positions with his arms and legs apart inside both a square and a circle. The now famous drawing represents Leonardo's study of proportion and symmetry, as well as his desire to relate man to the natural world, and it has become the most famous drawing in the history of art. Today you can see it on €1 coins and in many other places. At the same time, Leonardo was making beautiful drawings of our anatomy, the inside of our bodies. Many people in Leonardo's day thought that it was wrong to study our anatomy, but for Leonardo, the body was like a machine. He wanted to see how it worked. He studied how people were different from animals, and he worked with doctors. Leonardo cut bodies open, drew them, and made some amazing discoveries. One day, Leonardo spoke to a very old man in a hospital in Florence. A few hours later the man died. Leonardo wanted to know why people die, so later he cut the man's body open and tried to find the answer. Leonardo saw that the walls of the man's arteries were much narrower than the arteries of a young person. Perhaps these narrow arteries stop the blood which is moving through our bodies, Leonardo thought. Was he right? Did this problem kill the old man? We do not know, but about 25% of all deaths today happen because of problems with the arteries and heart. Leonardo thought sight was humankind's most important sense and eyes the most important organ, and he stressed the importance of saper vedere, or knowing how to see. He believed in the accumulation of direct knowledge and facts through observation. A good painter has two chief objects to paint: man and the intention of his soul, Leonardo wrote. The former is easy, the latter hard, for it must be expressed by gestures and the movement of the limbs. To more accurately depict those gestures and movements, Leonardo began to study anatomy seriously and dissect human and animal bodies during the 1480s. His drawings of a fetus in utero, the heart and vascular system, sex organs and other bone and muscular structures are some of the first on human record. In addition to his anatomical investigations, Leonardo studied botany, geology, zoology, hydraulics, aeronautics and physics. He sketched his observations on loose sheets of papers and pads that he tucked inside his belt. Leonardo placed the papers in notebooks and arranged them around four broad themes: painting, architecture, mechanics and human anatomy. He filled dozens of notebooks with finely drawn illustrations and scientific observations. Amazingly, Leonardo's anatomy drawings are still helping people today. In 2005, a doctor at Papworth Hospital in Cambridge, England, studied Leonardo's drawings of the heart. They gave him an idea about how to work in a different way on one part of the heart. This helped to save people's lives. It was not easy to study anatomy in Leonardo's time. He used knives and his hands to open bodies, and he often worked at night. The bodies began to smell bad very quickly, and at times Leonardo had to leave them in his workshop. It was hard to go into a dark room and look at death in the middle of the night. Leonardo was afraid, but he was curious too. He had to go and see.